And we are live. Excellent, excellent. Hello, all the humans. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix Sunday Speaker event. Remember, if you like our content, please press the like button and subscribe to get more of our awesomeness. Join our Patreon, or better yet, become a member of HSGP. Today's presentation aligns with the values of humanism with critical thinking. Critical thinking is a skill that requires continued attention, practice, and reflection. Exercising our minds to build these skills enables us to challenge biases in ourselves and others, paving the way for a fair, open-minded, and autonomous perspective that fosters a multicultural worldview. Global awareness. The end goal of global awareness is global citizenship, which recognizes our personal responsibility to foster a healthy and dignified life for everyone in our global community. And peace and social justice. True peace involves an intense commitment to social justice and affirms the human rights and personal autonomy of all people. Any level of injustice against groups or individuals signifies existing conflict, even if the conflict isn't immediate or obvious. We attain peace only by consistently responding to injustice through thoughtful conflict resolution that aims to repair harms and ensure a fair and equitable society moving forward. Today, we have the Association of Secular Elected Officials, ASEO, with Representation Matters, Secular Elected Officials Speak Out. First, we have Ron Millar, who is the Political and PAC Coordinator at the Center for Freethought Equality, the political and advocacy arm of the American Humanist Association. Then we have Sarah Levin, Program Director at Secular Democrats of America, and the founder and principal of Secular Strategies, a consulting firm specializing in serving non-religious constituencies. From ASEO, we have Leonard Pressburg, founder and president of ASEO. Leonard has been a member of the Fayette County School Board since December 2011 and a former chair of the Fayette Democratic Committee. Leonard graduated with a BA from Oberlin College and a JD magna cum laude from University of Richmond. He is a former preschool teacher and currently serves as CFO for Women's Medical Center. Leonard has served as a coach and volunteer in various nonprofits. Currently, he serves on the boards of the Red Clay Storytelling Festival and the Fayette Votes. Leonard and his wife Elizabeth have 3 children. And our final speaker from ASEO is Danny Chiricki. He's treasurer. Born and raised in Montana, Danny Chiricki moved to New York City in his 20s to figure out how people cope with rapid social and technical changes and how to encourage humans to pay more attention to long-term dangers such as climate change. As an environmental social scientist, Chiricki has been a humanist all of his life and a non-theist since high school. He has been involved in politics and culture and social change all of his life. He is currently a member of the Billings City Council in Montana. He has been the president of the Billings Association of Humanists since 2013 and has worked to advance public policy driven by science and data. Please give a big HSGP welcome to the Association of Secular Elected Officials. Leonard, to you, sir.
Thank you, Ron, for that great introduction. I think you covered some of the points we're going to be getting at soon. I also want to thank the whole organization. Luke, Alex, thank you so much for having us here today. So my name again is Leonard Pressburg. I serve on the school board in Fayette County, Georgia, just south of Atlanta. And I am the founder and president of the Association of Secular Elected Officials. And we were formed basically to help elected officials across this country be authentic about their beliefs and ethics, provide a forum for secular elected officials to connect with each other for education, support, and fellowship. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the demographics in our country. We're going to talk a little bit about why, as secular individuals, and I use the word secular, and please don't let that offend or annoy anyone, as I use that as a shorthand. I know, this is a humanist group. Sometimes we call ourselves free thinkers or atheists or any number of different labels. So we're using the shorthand secular today. We're going to talk a little bit about the demographics in this country. Why, as secular officials, it's important for us to be involved politically to make good decisions for all of us. We're going to talk about what you guys can do as a group and individually to get involved. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you guys should consider running for office. And so to start us all off, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to get us started.
All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for hosting us. I shouldn't say welcome. I said thank you for hosting us. My name is Sarah Levin. As Leonard mentioned, I'm the program director of Secular Democrats of America. I recognize this is a nonpartisan space, so I'm just bringing my experience with secular Democrats to encourage all of you to get involved in your political party as one avenue of really bringing your secular and humanist values with you into your politics and helping to increase representation, which is what today is all about. So I'm just going to talk really quickly about the numbers, the demographics, and sort of the why we're here. So I'm sure you all have heard this before. The largest, fastest growing religious demographic in the country is the religiously unaffiliated. And this what you're looking at is coming from a very, very recent, in the last few weeks, poll released by Gallup. This particular chart breaks it down by generation, which is important to note because, and I'm sure you've all heard this as well, the religiously unaffiliated, a huge number of them are millennials and Generation Z. We have the most secular generation ever coming up as the new slate of voters. And so that's a really important opportunity for our community to take advantage of and really try to turn into political influence and political clout. However, and actually before I say that, this is the flip side of that, right? So we're seeing this increase of unaffiliated people. And of course, on the flip side, we're now seeing less than 50% of Americans belong to our church, which has grabbed a lot of headlines recently, but we know that this is just part of a longer trend that our community has been observing for years. But I think the mainstream media made kind of a big deal out of that dipping under 50%. So that's really exciting for us. However, we are still really severely underrepresented in government, despite all of that good news. And this is a breakdown of the current Congress. You can see that only 1% of members of Congress are elected, despite the fact that 1 in 4 Americans now, and possibly larger than that, are unaffiliated. Here's another breakdown that really shows the gap, right? So if you look at Protestants, for example, 55.4% of Congress includes Protestants, but only 43%, more than a 10-point difference of U.S. adults are actually Protestant. You actually have overrepresentation with a lot of religious groups, even including some of the religious minorities. So you have, 6.2% of members of Congress are Jewish, but only 2% of the American population is Jewish. And at least, with some of these other religious minorities, the gap is pretty small, right? Buddhists and Muslims and Hindus make up a very small percentage, 1% of U.S. adults, but they do have some representation in Congress, which is a good thing. The only group that has the kind of gap that this kind of gap is the religiously unaffiliated. It's just this huge 26% of US adults and then 0.2% being unaffiliated in Congress. And we currently only have 1 member of Congress who identifies as a non-theist, which is Congressman Huffman. We also have Congressman Raskin, who identifies as a humanist, but not as a non-theist. And there is a larger group of members of Congress that are just unaffiliated, meaning that they just didn't choose to identify with a specific denomination. But of course, that's not quite the same as publicly identifying with our community as a humanist or one of the other labels, or of course, as a non-theist, who specifically will say on the record that they don't believe in a higher power. So that's at the federal level. We're also seeing the same problem at the state level. We have, and I'll just pull this up really quick, there's about 7,000 state legislators in the country, and only 60 of them have been identified with our community. Now, on the one hand, that's a huge increase from past years, and Ron Millar is going to talk about that as well. But it just goes to show that we have a long way to go to, to have our community really properly represented in government. And the rest of this presentation is about the many, many ways that you individually and as part of this group, as part of the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix, can be part of that change. Because of course we know that representation matters, because when you have a seat at the table, you're able to provide a perspective, and you're able to fight for your community to make sure that you're not excluded, and that things that might not have been considered unless you have your perspective at the table those ideas get heard. And we can also, of course, do the important work of destigmatizing what it means to be non-religious and preventing discrimination and all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Ron, right, to go into the next part of this presentation.
You're turning it over to me.
Sorry, Danny. Yeah, to Danny. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. So as often in situations like this, the first question we need to ask is why? And my answer to that is that it's really kind of twofold. One, it's our values that are being attacked by the literalists and the ideologues in the religious conservative nativist coalition. So we're the ones who are being attacked. And two, we're the people who have the values and skills that once made America that shining beacon on the hill. And much as I hate to use that phrase, and I won't actually say it out loud, we can do it, and we can do it again. So next slide. So the first thing to keep in mind about this is that secularism is what created the United States in the very first place. We are an experiment, not just in democracy, but also in the values of the European Enlightenment. Those are among a whole bunch of other things. We're less dependent on God for our morality, and much more dependent upon the human experience in order to make decisions about our lives. This was a whole movement of human experience that was refined by philosophers, natural philosophers, scientists, and all of that became the philosophy of science at some point. So this nation, this experiment we are part of, were deeply founded in secular values, and culminated in probably the wealthiest middle class that was ever seen in human history after World War II. The progressive era in the United States was driven by these values. Benevolent fraternal organizations in the 20th century, many of the liberal Christian churches. So this belief system dominated at one point in the United States. So what happened? Next slide. Rush happened. It began with William F. Buckley's master's thesis, God and Man at Yale, where he pointed out that the pragmatic values of the post-World War II political situation dominated both political parties, and that conservatives like himself didn't have a chance of winning power again unless they focused on not reality, not data, but on ideology. And a couple of decades later, that became real and part of the cultural war when Rush Limbaugh took to conservative talk radio, and then I guess it was 12 years later when that whole thing moved on to television. So politics is important, voting is important, engaging in protests and all those types of things are very important. But if we only engage at the cultural level, we are losing, and we will continue to lose. Rush and the conservative movement changed the narrative that drives American politics. We have to change that back. So next slide, how do we do that? The main reason I think it's important for us to step up is because we as secular humanists, secularists, respect science, and we believe that science should be what drives public policy. In my opinion, the phrase that probably was the most important one over the last year was follow the science. And while that wasn't exactly the thing that we argued about within the system itself, we saw within the federal government itself, we saw that a lot of time and effort was being spent in order to hide the science and to make it, more important, less important, to make it less important. So we need to fight back on that level. Other important things is that policy and program evaluation, those are things that are science driven. What we've seen in the last 20 years is data driven decision making in business, which has transformed the way we do business here, not just in the United States, but around the world. While meanwhile, over in the policy area, the federal government is being kept from collecting data on handgun-related violence. Why? Because they don't want policy driven by data. They want it driven by ideology. So what do we bring to this discussion? Next slide. So along with our values that we've been just talking about and the importance of science, we pay attention to outcomes instead of ideology. As Felix Adler, who started the, sorry, I'm blanking, ethical culture movement in New York City, used to say, deed, not creed. And that is one of the most important things that we bring to this. We're more likely to ask questions like, what are the tools for analyzing public policy? What are the underlying assumptions in the debate? What are the economic and cultural implications in the debate? What's the role of media, messaging, and communications? And on and on and on. We are much more likely not to be content with just whatever the popular culture is saying, whatever the news is telling us is the reason for these things. We are much more likely to step up and actually try to figure out the actual causes of what's going on. Now, here in Billings, Montana, one of the things, this is an example of this, one of the things that we're dealing with right now is a massage ordinance, which is being directly aimed at trying to stop human trafficking. Well, in and of itself, sitting there and drawing a line between legitimate and illegitimate businesses who say they're doing massage kind of makes sense. At the end of the day, we're not doing two things. We're not dealing with the root cause of any of the root causes of this problem. We're not, which here in Billings, one of the biggest one is that we have not been funding our police department, and we have not had an adequately funded vice enforcement department for a very long time. We have literally one person who deals with rape, domestic violence, and anything to deal with a sexual nature. So, and the other aspect of it that our policy here in Billings is totally ignoring is that this is all being driven by making commercial sex illegal. And we're not even talking about, the impact that the black market has on human slavery or illegal trafficking. So we tend to, while there are a lot of people who are, knee-jerk reactors to the Bill of Rights, in my opinion, we tend to actually take a much closer look at the actual causes and reasons that these things are going on. So do we need to stop human slavery? Absolutely. But how we do it matters. And I think secularists are much more, have the tools to pay more attention to how we do it than anything else. So next slide. So voting matters, it does matter, but changing the narrative matters even more. As a secular group doing public forums, you guys are already working on changing the narrative. And listening to what you were talking about and what you're doing at the beginning of this meeting, that really drove home to me the fact that you guys are engaged in your local community and trying to make a difference in your local community. So running openly secular pro-science, so that's an important step. The next step that we're really urging you guys to think about is running openly secular pro-science candidates for political offices, not necessarily to win, but to get our voice out there, to get what we believe out there, to start to change the narrative, to start to change the debate. So finally, one of my favorite anarchists, Emma Goldman, is, it turns out, falsely attributed with saying, if elections worked, they'd make them illegal. It is true, however, that this was an anarchist battle cry and a socialist battle cry back at the beginning of the 20th century, the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, as the Gilded Era was being replaced by the progressive era here in the United States. These days, we're all abuzz about what's wrong with our politics, what's wrong with our elections. And one thing I would recommend that you do is to take a look at a TED Talk by Catherine Gill. I will share the link to the TED Talk in the chat. It's titled, "U.S. Politics Isn't Broken, It's Fixed." And in it, she talks about two things. One, winner-take-all elections, and two, political party primaries. The results of these two things are to keep the two parties that are there in power, and also to drive the people who are elected to the extremes of both of those ends, meaning that the middle, which used to dominate the political conversation and political party in this country, is being pushed over on the edge. And yeah, I see the comment and they're just popping up in there about ranked choice voting. Yes, absolutely. That is one of the solutions she talks a lot about in that video. So, I think it's really true that we need to think not just about how we change the narrative, but we also need to think about the way we select our elected policy decision makers. So that's my spiel. Next up, how do we increase our representation in policy decision making? I think Ron's taking it over.
Yep, thank you very much, Danny. I'm Ron Millar. I'm the Political and PAC Coordinator for the Center for Freethought Equality, which is the advocacy and political arm of the American Humanist Association. So thank you very much for having me to talk to you a little bit. So you've heard about the demographics, where we've now reached a critical size of the atheist and humanist community and the nuns, that we have a chance now to counter the right-wing stance of the white Christian nationalists who have far too much political power. And as Danny's talking about, we have a viewpoint of the world where we're looking at evidence, compassion, and looking for a new way to move our society forward. So next slide. So my goal here is to give you some ideas on what you can do as an individual and also as an organization to be engaged in the electoral arena, because the only way we're going to challenge Christian nationalism and get our society on a more evidence-based footing is to exercise our political power. So we have to be engaged in the process. So I know a lot of you as individuals are doing these things. I'm going to touch on these briefly about what individuals can do. And so when you see what you're doing, look at the next step to see what you can do in addition to what you're currently doing to be further engaged and build our community's visibility and power clout within the political arena. So next slide. So the baseline is you got to register to vote. You can't be engaged in the political environment unless you're a registered voter, and you got to stay registered. There's a whole lot of things that can kick you off in addition to the voter suppression efforts that folks are putting in. Just moving can make you lose your ability to cast a ballot. So if you move, make sure you re-register, stay registered, don't get caught up in the political suppression. Know where your polling place is so that you're ready on election day. Next slide. Be an informed voter. You just don't go into the ballot box randomly filling in circles just for the hell of it. You want to vote for people who are going to make change. So there's lots of partisan and nonpartisan resources out there. The nonpartisan ones, Ballotopedia, Project Vote Smart, the League of Women Voters has a great site at Vote 411. Use these to become educated. And then you're going to want to look at, what policy issues really matter to you. And you look to the groups that are promoting those, whether it's abortion rights, LGBTQ equality, or there's this wonderful political action committee that I know about called the Freethought Equality Fund. You might want to check them out, supporting atheist and humanist elected officials. Next slide. One great way to learn about candidates is attend candidate forums and events. You can see the candidates once we get back to in-person events, face-to-face. You can ask questions directly that you want answers to. And when you go to these events, a great way to increase our visibility is to wear your humanist and atheist swag, t-shirts, buttons, pins, whatever you got. And if you get some colleagues to come with you, friends to come with you, they'll think there's a movement out there. And that's exactly what we want to have, is a movement to promote the atheist and humanist community in the electoral arena and increase our visibility. Doing that also diminishes the bias that currently exists against us. So be visible. And also, it's a candidate forum. Like I said, you want to ask questions and plan ahead. Have somebody film you asking your question. You can post it later so people can see what the responses are to the issues that matter to you in our community. And take photos with the candidates. Again, the visibility with the swag is great. Next slide. So you invest money in your career, you invest money for your retirement, you invest resources for your house. If you want a better society, you got to invest your time and money in the electoral arena. Money and time, volunteer time, that's what drives campaigns. So, create a budget. How much time can you spend on the candidates that you want to win, and how much money you can spend, and then invest wisely in both. There's lots of things you can do. Door knocking, phone banking, texting is becoming much more popular. These are great activities. You get to meet other people within your community. And again, you build our visibility if you got a little swag on with atheist and humanist items. Next slide. Now that you know who you want to win the election and what they need to do to win, don't hold that information to yourself. Go out there and educate your friends and families. Share the information. It's a great way, again, to start conversations about what's important in your community. And it's also, once you share great information, you'll become an opinion leader in your community, and folks will start coming to you for advice on who they should vote for and work with, and you'll become a political leader within your community. Next slide. So obviously, it comes down to election day, you got to vote. And there's a whole lot of different elections out there, and you got to vote in all of them. Don't be that person who just votes once every 4 years in the presidential contest. Make sure your voice is really heard. Local elections are incredibly important. And because voter turnout drops significantly in municipal elections, your vote is actually more powerful when you're voting for your local elected officials. And your day-to-day life is driven by these people. Quality of your drinking water, the parks, the schools, your day-to-day life. So be involved up and down the ballot. Make sure you know who the candidates are that need to be elected. Again, work for them, invest in them, and then get people out to vote for them. Next slide. So your obligation isn't over on election day. once you get the people you want elected, you got to keep following up with them to make sure that they fulfill their promises and to make sure that they know that you're an interested constituent. And again, builds visibility, builds relationships. A lot of this is about building relationships, and they got to know that we as a community exist out there and that they need to be responsive to us. All right, next slide. We can skip the next 4. So what can your organization do? And I know you guys already do some of this stuff, so that's great. I really am pleased with some of the stuff I've seen you guys do. But there's a lot of other things that nonprofits can do and should be doing in the elections. The biggest myth is that nonprofits aren't allowed to participate in the electoral arena, and it's just not true. There's a whole host of things you can do, see from this slide. The one thing you can't do, though, is endorse or appear to endorse candidates or political parties. So there's a great organization out there called Boulder Advocacy, BOLDER Advocacy, and they have all kinds of different guidelines and resources to show you how you do everything without getting tripped up. And again, there's a lot of things to do. We'll touch on them here. Next slide. So the key thing is basic civics. Make sure your membership are registered to vote, know when the elections are happening, and have access to various nonpartisan resources that they can follow up on candidates. So again, Ballotpedia, Project Vote Smart, the League of Women Voters Vote for One are excellent resources. And since we don't do as much civics education in the schools that we should, and even our local news always seems to be talking about candidates at the day before the election or afterwards, you got 29 days voter registration, to be registered before an election in Arizona. So you got to do that education early to get people voting, get people registered to vote, and get them turn them out for elections. Next slide. One great thing you can do as a nonpartisan nonprofit group is just educate candidates that we exist as a community. You can send emails and letters to the candidates talking about your group, about the issues that are important to you. Again, it builds visibility, it builds relationships, and it just makes us engaged in the political process. So reach out to them. It's a simple letter, an easy thing to do through, even an email or a regular USPS letter. Next slide. And then once you're comfortable actually reaching out to candidates, you can add a candidate questionnaire to your letter when you reach out to candidates, which specifies what issues are important and asks for their response on those issues. Our opposition has been doing this for at least 4 decades, so we're a little behind the curve on this, but we've got to get started, and now's a great time to start. You can see I have 2 examples of their voter register, their voter guides, which are not quite appropriate. And again, so you want to go to Boulder Advocacy so you do them correctly. But again, it's a resource that nonprofits are allowed to provide it to their members and to the general public. So I urge you to think about doing that for targeted races. I mean, you don't have to do everybody, but think about an open seat that's coming around, and a lot of people vying for the primary election or the general election, and it gives you an opportunity to be involved in that election and then branch out from there once you've done a few successful ones. Next slide. Another great resource is Secular America Votes. They have excellent guides on voter registration and get out the vote activities, which are perfectly acceptable for nonprofit groups to be involved with. And I'm sure that they would love to come talk to your group at some point too. So reach out to them. Like I say, they have great resources. Next slide. So candidate debates, I think, are a great opportunity to build relationships, build the visibility of your group. You could co-sponsor them with some interfaith groups that you work with or social justice groups that you're working with. You don't have to do it all on your own. Again, you can target a specific race that is of great interest in the community. But it expands your electoral credentials, and it establishes you as an organization to be reckoned with, to make sure that the candidates see you as both a resource within the community and a constituency that they need to talk to. So after the election is over, you're still not off the hook. That's when you should be inviting elected officials to speak to your group. In Arizona, you have great elected officials who I'm sure you've had several times speak to your group already, but they're out there. Also, invite candidates that weren't successful, and they can talk about their experience as being a candidate. So again, there's no end to this cycle. Just, one follows after another. You got to stay engaged all the time in the electoral process. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leonard to talk about you running for office. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. So running for office, we often think that there's something special about running for office. You got to know something, you have to have a certain amount of experience, you have to be connected in a certain amount of way. And that, makes us hesitant. But we also know that we have all seen elected officials either in person or on TV and have thought to ourselves, if that guy could do it, I know I can, right? Whether it's our past president or, there's just multiple examples of, that the people you see who are elected are not our best and our brightest leaders. So you can all do it. And so what I want to talk about a little bit is picking an office and making that decision to run. Talk a little bit about messaging and a little bit about just the process of campaigning. And so if we can go to the next slide. The first thing you have to do is you gotta look and decide what office you might be interested in. There are so many offices all over. We have local offices, city offices, county offices, state offices, federal offices, all sorts of different levels, subject matters, content. What's interesting to you? Public parks and access to parks in your city, what's important to you? Or is, the school system important to you? What are you interested in? So thinking about that in terms of, what office you might want to get involved in. The next thing you got to do is your research, because all of these different offices have all sorts of different terms and qualifications. I know here in Georgia, there are elections going on all the time. It depends on the year and the month, what kind of elections they are. And so you got to look into that. You got to look into how you get on the ballot. Again, depending on the different kinds of offices you are, you might go to a local elections office. You might go to a political party office. There are different ways that you can get on the ballot. And, sometimes you're running for an office, it's a partisan office, so you have to be associated with a political party. Some offices are nonpartisan, in which you're not directly associated on the ballot with a political party. So all different sorts of factors. In addition to those ballot access rules, for instance, in Georgia, if it's a partisan office, you pretty much have to be from one of two parties, compared to, let's say, New York, which allows all sorts of different political parties to get involved. You generally have to figure out what your campaign disclosure and finance rules are. Where do you have to report your contributions and expenditures? How do you do that for each race? Again, in Georgia, there are different systems depending on what race you're running for. So state level candidates report those campaign donations and expenditures to a different place than local races are. I do not have any idea how they do it in Arizona, but I'm sure it's a equally transparent and easy to follow system as it is here in Georgia. And so, when you doing all that research, the other big important factor is who is the current person in that office. Is the incumbent someone who's really, really bad? Or is it perhaps an open seat where the incumbent is moving on or retiring? All of those different factors and research bring you to that point where you're ready to make a decision. And we'll go to the next slide. The first thing you got to do is you got to clear it, with the people who you live with and love, because when you get into a political campaign, it can become pretty all encompassing. It is, on one hand, the most public thing you'll ever do, right? Your name is on this ballot, goes out to every single person. At the same time, it's also one of the most private things you can do. And the fact that, you're the only one who's all in and isn't thinking about other considerations. Whether even if it's your spouse, they've got some other ideas about what you might be doing with your time than perhaps campaigning all the time. So, the people around you have got to support you, and then you got to look towards your other bigger set of contacts, whether it's, your fellow humanists, the people you work with, the people you drink with, the people you play cards with, whoever they are, you want to make sure you're going to get some support and help from them. We tend to think of campaigns as these complicated things with lots of staff members running around, right? We see that on TV, candidates are running around. They've always got like a whole, team of young people following them around with their phones and agendas. Most races are much, much smaller kinds of things. They're run over kitchen tables by a candidate, a spouse, and a couple close friends. So again, there's lots of things to think about, but as we all know, any one of us can do this, right? Danny and I are proof that anyone can get elected with some hard work and some good ideas. So let's move on to the next slide. So then you're ready to tell people you're running for office, right? You got to get that 60-second elevator speech. Why are you running for office? First-time candidates, we tend to get a little sort of resume-y with our speech. We tend to talk about, our experiences or qualifications. But that's not what people want to hear. People want to hear an answer to a question. And the question is why should I vote for you? Right? It's got to tell a story of something that's wrong in your community, something that you want to fix. It's got to communicate those values, that Ron started us off with, and Danny mentioned when we talked about why it's important to run for office and why it's important for secular people to be elected. It's got to communicate those values, and it's got to be authentic. We are sort of past the time of the Teflon politician that, doesn't offend anyone and doesn't give straight answers, right? People want to vote for someone who is real, who they trust, who they can empathize and agree with. So, why you're running for office. So how do you go about and do that? We'll turn to the next slide, right? A political campaign is not that complicated, right? You just have to have enough resources to get your message to the right number of voters. So how do you know how many voters you need to reach? Well, you can go back and look at past elections for that office and how many votes the winners got. You can go back 2 or 3 cycles and see if you want to run for mayor, how many votes did the winning mayor get each time. That'll give you some idea of what your win number is, what the number of votes you're going for. And then, we don't like to talk about fundraising, but it is a big part of political campaigning. You got to have the money to get the message out. And this is probably the hardest thing for first-time candidates to do. We're not used to picking up the phone and asking people we know for money, especially when it feels like you're asking for a personal handout or gift. But what's important to remember is you're not asking for a personal handout and gift, right? You are asking for that person to contribute to making their community better by investing in you as a candidate, right? They're not giving their money to you for your benefit. They're giving money for their community's benefit. And if you can think of the fundraising that way, that can help. But there is no doubt about it, you do have to get on the phone and ask people for money. You want to target which voters you're going for, depending on the office and depending on the jurisdiction. If you are in, let's say, a particularly Democratic area, that tells you one thing about which kind of voters you want to contact, depending on what your story is, versus if you're in a more Republican area. Generally, during a campaign, you want to target people that you want to get to come out and vote for you, and not spend a whole lot of time or any time talking to the people who aren't going to vote for you no matter what. And so you want to, sometimes you feel like the best way is to go convince the other side that you're the right candidate. But a lot of times in campaigning, it's making sure the people who want to support you get out to vote, rather than trying to convince people that you're the right one. Right, there's all sorts of different ways to get in touch with voters. You can knock on their doors, you can call them up on the phone, you can send them a robocall, you can send them a handwritten postcard, you can send them, more traditional direct mail. There are pros and cons to each of these different methods. Generally, the more personal the contact, the more effective it is. But you will also find all sorts of different opinions. If you get into a campaign, know that you're going to get all sorts of recommendations from all sorts of different people. And a lot of those recommendations are going to be in direct contradiction with each other, right? You will get people who swear that you need a lot of yard signs, and you will get people to swear that yard signs don't vote and are a waste of time. You just have to be you and confident in your choices. You take in the information, what you know about where you live, what you've seen other people do, what feels right to you, and move forward and just do it. There are all sorts of reasons, why people win, why people lose. But the most important decision is that one to actually get out there and run. It's important to run in races as a secular person, both in places where you think you have a good chance of winning, because we need secular people in office to make those evidence-based decisions for all of us. But there's also lots of benefits to running in races in areas where perhaps you feel like you don't have a chance, or your political party doesn't have a chance, or you're outside the mainstream, because that gives you the opportunity as a candidate to help shape the discussion, change the community discussion of issues. There's actually a great article in the New York Times from last week, how there's lots of evidence that all sorts of blue candidates in these hopelessly red districts all across primarily the South, running in state and congressional races that they didn't really have a chance to win, how all those individual races actually did combine and make a difference in terms of the presidential election and the election of our 2 senators here in Georgia. So getting out there and doing it and being a speaker for the values that our community shares and what we want in our government is important regardless. So I think that is mostly our formal presentation here as we've gone through the slides, but really we would love to take individual questions, whether it's about our specific situations, our thoughts on running for office, how to get involved, why it's important, sort of anything. So I'm going to turn it back over, I guess, to Ron to kind of facilitate this piece. Is that how we're doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. So as always, if you'd like to ask a question, go ahead and raise your hand in the participants window, or I will try and see you if you're raising your hand this way. Otherwise, I will go ahead and read a few of the questions that we have so far. Ed Casper also mentioned in chat the redistricting process. There is an independent redistricting going on right now, and the commission's meetings are public. That's a great way to get engaged and involved as well. So anybody have any questions?
Can I just add to that districting thing?
Please.
The worst districting that we have ever seen in the world is the US Senate.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. Is there, Luke asks, for any panelists, can you speak from your experience with people starting with appointed positions as a stepping stone for elected positions? Have you worked with any candidates who took this route?
Sure, I can take that. I did myself. I've sat on a couple of boards here in Billings before running for election. It's something that I recommend very highly. The last 3 elected mayors came through that process. I don't know how many of our city council members did, but I know a lot of them did. So it does a couple of things for you. It gets your name out there, but it also gets you in a position where you're forced to have to start figuring out what the how the system works.
Any other panelists would like to respond to that?
I just concur. It's a great way to start building your political network by serving on boards, seeing how the community that you're interested in works, who are the main players. So yeah, and if you're running for office, obviously, you want to attend the meetings of the elected officials that you want to become. So you have to really do the research to know what office you want to get involved with.
Okay. Brian, you have a question. Your hand is raised.
Thank you. You did mention that organizations such as this could help support political parties, campaigns, and candidates. What is the rule of the heuristic or the guiding line for when too much politics is too much for a nonprofit? Thanks.
Sure. The key is you cannot endorse or appear to endorse a political candidate. You have to be nonpartisan. You have to be, it has to be civics education that you're doing. So it has to be nonpartisan. So that's the line you don't want to cross.
I would add that it's been a changing line over the last couple of years, simply because the people that were in power in the White House is trying to get more people involved and, more of their people being able to do that. That hasn't exactly been rolled back, although I don't expect it to be supported the same way. The other hard line that I keep on there, Ron's right about the one that he mentioned, is 5% of what you spend. Do not spend more than 5% of what you spend on overtly political things. And that advice was not made by a lawyer.
Right, and this is where you can work with Boulder Advocacy and their guidelines, because if you're registered as a religious group, then the 5% holds, and some humanist groups are registered as a religious group, and that involves your advocacy and lobbying of elected officials. Basic civics education, talking about issues, that's unlimited. I mean, there's no restriction on your free speech to urge people to become involved in the electoral process and what issues they should be focusing on. And as for, if you're not registered as a religious group, then it's murky, but it gets into that 15-20% of your advocacy time that's allowable. But again, don't ask us, ask experts at Boulder Advocacy, who has lawyers who are trained on this, and they have great resources.
Philip also comments that we have a secular liaison group, Secular AZ, here in town that can also help people who are interested in running under that secular banner. So, yep. Athena, you have your hand raised. Athena, you're muted.
I had a question about science, but Athena also mentioned that there's a book by Robert Heinlein called Take Back Your Government. I'd just like to know what the panelists, are they aware of this book and what do they think of it? But my first question was about science, so from the first part of the presentation. So as far as science goes, I am reticent to put science on the altar. I mean, I consider myself to be non-theistic, and there are far too many people who put science up on the altar and worship it. And the problem with science is not this, mono, this solid object that is always, I mean, science is composed of a lot of individuals whose goal is to be curious and to expand knowledge and to constantly challenge the status quo. The idea of a scientific theory is you posit the theory and then you try to disprove it. And there's a lot of people who disagree with things in science, and science does have a methodology for resolving these disagreements. But nevertheless, when you start saying, well, I'll believe science, belief is kind of like that, that God thing again. So I just want to point out that in this last year, there's been an awful lot of cherry picking of, well, I believe this scientist, he's right, and any other scientist that challenges them, well, they're wrong. And so I just want to put before the audience here the thought that science isn't this what's the word I'm looking for? Monolithic. Thank you.
Yeah.
Monolithic thing. But in fact, it is a process, and
it's a process.
It can be used for good or ill.
And that's another aspect of it too. You're absolutely right.
Yeah,
I'm referring to the epistemological process of basing your decisions on human experience and methodologies that we come up with, and seeing if something works, and if it doesn't work, trying something else, as opposed to what's going on right now, which is much more ideologically based. I read it, and this is my interpretation of how I'm reading this book, and therefore that's the way it is, type of approach to things. But you're absolutely right. I run into it all the time, that people believe in science and don't think critically about what it is that they're saying that they believe in. You're absolutely right about that.
So has anybody heard of the Heinlein book, or? I guess not. All right, well, thanks very much. Yeah, I was a little concerned about when you started talking about gun control. I'm going, there's a lot of ideology behind that, and science.
All I was saying about in that case is that the ideologues supporting or against gun control are also making it impossible for the federal government to collect data about gun-driven homicide and stuff like that. So, you know, the ideology is using the system to prevent the collection of data.
Well, yeah, but on the other hand, you could look at that reticence to collect data as defensive, because knowing what can be done with that data, anyway, that's a whole nother discussion I won't get into, but I'm just saying that there may be more than one point of view on this. Okay, that's all what I'm saying.
Yeah, and we can advocate for that based on the policy, not a partisan perspective, and absolutely. So
I'd love to have a world where all the data can be collected and everybody can look at it in a dispassionate, objective way and go, okay, let's see what we want to do with this. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So, thank you.
First step is to collect the data.
Yeah.
Get more data-driven people in the office.
I agree with Danny.
Yeah, you can't measure it if you can't manage it if you can't measure it, right? So, all right, Alex has a comment regarding Enlightenment Now from Steven Pinker. Is a great book that talks about that. Anyone else have any other questions? I would like to put my comment in that it's interesting that we're putting forth secular individuals and how it would be good for them to put that forth. And they're doing that in spite of being non-religious. And it would be great if someone comes out as secular and they're seen as that's a net positive above those who are religious. And that's that part of that mind shift and that discussion that I would like to see happen. But to that question, how do we as secular individuals become out and proud about that, our secular advocacy?
So I can take that first. I think one of the things I mentioned earlier is getting involved in your political party. And one of the reasons that's important is because having conversations about what secular values are and what we bring to the table is important, but it's also important to actually deliver value to these parties, right? Because we can't just expect people to go out on a limb who are openly non-religious, or to be openly non-religious if we're not delivering votes and we're not delivering funding, right? That's how campaigns work. So we have to build those institutions so that there is a net gain for people who are going to run and identify with their community to actually do that. Because in order for to get to the place where people see it as a net positive for non-religious people to be in office, we need to have more non-religious people in office. That's the first step. We don't have enough people we can point to. We have some and we can, but there's not enough that people see on a daily basis and identify with, wow, this great policy, or that's a great approach to policy, this great constituency service is coming from a secular representative. There's just not enough of that. So you have to step back and say, okay, before, to get that kind of visibility where people associate good politics and good policies with secular representatives, how do we get more high quality candidates out there? And part of that is being part of the electoral process in all the ways that we've outlined today, and to be part of building that support system so that we can recruit our own candidates from our community. We can give them the support we need. We can give them the 50 volunteers they need to go door knocking and phone banking, and we can actually raise money for them. So in addition to, just looking at the existing field of candidates and informing yourself and finding who's most aligned, we really should be building our own pipeline as well. And one way of many others to do that is to be really involved in your political party, because a lot of that pipeline comes out of the party, and a lot of the structures that allow people who are like-minded, for example, Democratic women, LGBT Democrats, I'm just using it as an example, that's in every party, has subgroups within the party that advocate for an issue area or an identity group. And they tend to push the party on the issues that their constituents care about, and they tend to be the best force within the party to create space for that identity group or for that issue for candidates. And so that's one way to get there, but it's a two-step process. First, we get more people elected, and then over time, we have great politicians like Athena Solomon, but times 50. so that the general public starts associating great policies with those candidates and elected officials.
And people need encouragement too. I think a lot of folks, don't feel that they have the resume to be an elected official. And so I think it's really helpful that as a community, you look at your own members and, talk to folks. And if you see somebody who you think should be running for a certain office, encourage them. People need the encouragement. They need to be asked sometimes to run for office. So again, your members, who they might be, what positions they might be great in, and encouragement goes a really long way to get people involved.
I would add to that, if somebody says that they don't think that they're qualified to do it, ask them to compare themselves to, I don't know, Ted Cruz. And another thing I would say too is just it's really important to have a good group of friends who you can go to, because you're going to get personally attacked. You're going to, you're going to feel like the world is against you and all that kind of stuff. And having a good group of family and friends around you for that support is really, 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 really important.
I enjoy your sense of humor, Danny. Thank you. Thank you. We have time for one last question if someone would like to step up. Otherwise, I will go ahead and start the wrap process. Anyone? Bueller? All right. Well, I want to thank Sarah, Ron, and ASEO for bringing this before our community. Really, really an important topic, and one that I feel very strongly about. I'm a local PC in my district and do the door knock and do all the things. It's something that we have a group here that does that. It's great to get involved, and I've met a ton of great human beings through that process. Through that shared co-creating. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and wrap it up. Sarah, any last final words? Any places we should go to find out more information, email addresses, contact information, anything like that?
Well, I'm just putting in the chat right now the website, secularofficials.org. Obviously you guys are really welcome with Athena, and we know Juan and Tori, is a great resource to make sure we reach people. Know people who are openly non-religious at the school board level, at the county level. Anybody who should know about the association, definitely let them know about it. If you want to run for office, maybe Ron, if you could put the resources, if you haven't already. Center for Freethought Equality has great resources if you want to run for office. And of course, if you run and win, you can become a member of ASEO. And otherwise, if you have any questions for me or that you want me to pass on to ASEO or to Ron, I'm going to put my email address in there.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. As always, if you enjoyed our content, then smash our subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon, become a member of HSGP, or volunteer to make the magic happen. With that, be well, stay safe, and take care. Goodbye, HSGP.
Thank you.